It was a pleasant summer afternoon, the type where the sun lazily drifts across the sky, casting a warm golden glow over the fields. I had just wrapped up my household chores when my phone buzzed with a message. It was from Aunt Linda, who lived just a few miles away on a sprawling property with an old, weathered barn behind her home. "Hey, could you swing by the barn and lend me a hand? I could really use an extra pair of hands," her message read. I didn't think twice about it. Aunt Linda had always been someone who was there for everyone. Whether you needed a shoulder to cry on, a hot meal, or some sound advice, she was always there with a smile and open arms. I couldn't turn her down. Upon my arrival, I noticed the barn door was ajar, and the familiar scent of hay and aged wood filled my nostrils. As I stepped inside, I spotted her at the back, kneeling on the ground surrounded by tools and supplies. She looked up at me and smiled, tucking a loose strand of auburn hair behind her ear. At 36, Aunt Linda still radiated that same youthful energy, her body toned from years of hard work on the farm. She wore a loose-fitting blouse that accentuated her curves perfectly, paired with well-worn jeans that hugged her hips just right. "Thanks for coming," she said, getting up and wiping her hands on a rag. "I just need a little help fixing this old stall. It's been on my to-do list for a while, but it's definitely a two-person job." "Of course. I'm happy to help," I replied, doing my best to suppress the sudden flutter of excitement in my chest as I watched her move around. We got to work hammering nails, lifting heavy boards, and chatting casually about various topics. She shared stories about the farm, the animals, and her plans for the upcoming season. I tried to concentrate on the task at hand, but it was challenging not to notice how close we were, our hands occasionally brushing against each other as we passed tools. At one point, as I reached for a board, our fingers touched briefly, sending a jolt of electricity through me. I looked up and for a moment our eyes locked. There was something in her gaze, soft and almost vulnerable. My breath hitched and I quickly averted my eyes, uncertain of how to respond. "Are you okay?" she asked, her tone softer than before, as if she sensed the shift in our dynamic. "Yeah, I'm fine," I stammered, feeling warmth creeping into my cheeks. We continued working, but the atmosphere had transformed. The light conversation faded, replaced by an unspoken tension. Each time I glanced at her, I couldn't help but notice how her blouse hugged her figure, how her hair fell over her shoulders, or the way her lips curled into a smile. Eventually, we wrapped up the repairs, and she stood up, stretching her arms overhead. The movement caused her shirt to rise slightly, revealing a glimpse of sun-kissed skin. I tried my best not to stare, but it was difficult. "That should do it," she said, wiping the sweat from her forehead. "Thanks again for your help." "Anytime," I replied, striving to keep my voice steady. She approached me, her gaze lingering on mine a little longer than usual. "You've really grown up," she remarked softly, her hand resting gently on my arm. I swallowed hard, uncertain of how to react. The way she looked at me and the softness in her voice made my heart race in a way I hadn't experienced before. "Yeah, I guess I have," I whispered, my voice barely audible. We stood there for a moment, the only sounds being the distant chirping of birds and the gentle rustle of hay beneath our feet. Her hand remained on my arm, and I could feel the warmth of her skin against mine. My heart raced as she took a step closer, her eyes searching mine for something unspoken. "I should probably get going," I said, breaking the silence, though a part of me longed to stay. "But stay a little longer," she murmured, her voice so quiet it was almost lost in the space between us, as if she was hesitant to ask. I hesitated, torn between the sense of obligation pulling me to leave and the undeniable attraction that kept me rooted to the spot with her in the barn. I didn't move. She took a step closer, closing the distance between us until I could feel the warmth radiating from her body and catch a hint of her perfume mingling with the earthy scent of the barn. Her fingers traced down my arm, sending shivers throughout my body. "Linda," I breathed, my voice barely a whisper, but before I could say anything else, she closed the gap between us, her lips meeting mine in a kiss that felt both gentle and electrifying. Time seemed to stand still as I kissed her back, my hands instinctively finding their way to her waist, drawing her nearer. Her fingers tangled in my hair as the kiss deepened, and for a moment nothing else mattered, just her, the sensation of holding her, and the way her lips moved against mine. When we finally broke apart, both of us breathing heavily, She looked up at me with those same vulnerable eyes. "I've been wanting to do that for a long time," she whispered, her voice slightly trembling. I didn't know," I replied, still trying to catch my breath, my heart racing. She smiled softly, placing her hand over my chest, feeling the rapid thump beneath her fingertips. I didn't want to make things awkward, but I couldn't help it. I gazed at her, my mind swirling with everything that had just happened. Part of me was still in disbelief, while another part, one that had always admired her and felt drawn to her, knew this moment had been coming for a long time. "I feel the same way," I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. For a while we stood in silence. The tension between us was thick and palpable. Finally she broke the stillness. "So what now?" she asked gently, uncertainty lacing her voice. I looked at her, taking in the way the fading light from the barn's windows cast a golden hue on her skin, and how her lips still looked slightly swollen from our kiss. "I don't know," I answered honestly. As I reached up to tuck a stray hair behind her ear, I couldn't help but express my feelings. "But I don't want this moment to end." Her eyes softened at my words and she smiled. "Then let's make sure it doesn't," she replied, leaning in again to capture my lips with hers. This kiss felt even more electrifying than the last, and we became completely absorbed in one another, the outside world fading away as we surrendered to the simmering passion that had been building between us for far too long. Time seemed to melt away as we lost ourselves in our kisses, our hands roaming each other's bodies with an intensity that had been growing for years. The urgency and desire of our connection fueled our kisses. My hands found her hips, pulling her closer as she pressed against me, her fingers tangling in my hair, gently tugging as her lips moved against mine. Soft yet assertive, brimming with an energy I had felt for longer than I could remember. I kissed her deeply, my hands gliding from her waist to the small of her back, feeling the warmth radiating through her blouse. A soft gasp escaped her lips as I kissed my way along her jaw, trailing down to her neck, tasting her skin as she arched her back, inviting me to explore. Her breaths came in quick, shallow gasps, and I could feel the rhythm of her chest rising and falling beneath my lips. With my hands now roaming freely, her blouse slipped off one shoulder, and I pressed my lips to the newly exposed skin, eliciting a shiver from her. Her hand slid down my back, drawing me closer as her lips found mine once more. The kiss filled with a desperate need. The air between us crackled with energy, each kiss and touch igniting something new. She gently pushed me back against the barn wall, her hands roaming over my chest as she slowly unbuttoned my shirt, sending my heart racing. Her lips followed the trail of her hands, kissing down my neck and along my collarbone as she undressed me with a confidence that took my breath away. When her lips found mine again, it was as if the outside world had vanished entirely. My hands traced the contours of her back, feeling the softness of her body as I drew her closer. I explored her mouth, intoxicated by her taste. She eagerly reciprocated, pressing her body into mine while her hands continued to roam, fueling my craving for more. We became enveloped in the rhythm of our movements, each kiss deepening, each touch more urgent. She guided me down to the hay-covered floor, her fingers grazing my skin as we fell together, our lips still locked. The warmth of her body and the softness of her lips felt surreal, like something out of a dream, both too intense and incredibly real. I kissed her neck, her collarbone, allowing my lips to travel down to the exposed skin just above her jeans. I heard her sharp intake of breath and felt her body responding to every caress. Her hand wove through my hair, gently pulling me back to her lips, where we kissed again with a fervor that consumed us both. Her hands moved to my jeans, skillfully unbuttoning them, and I mirrored her actions, deftly unfastening the buttons of her blouse and sliding it off her shoulders until it lay with our other discarded clothing on the barn floor. As the final barriers fell away, the heat between us intensified, leaving nothing between us but skin and the undeniable pull of desire. Her body felt inviting beneath my hands, every curve beckoning for my touch as we explored one another. Each kiss deepened our bond, our mutual hunger reflected in every movement. She kissed me with a passion that left me breathless, her hands gliding over my body and making the rest of the world fade away. In that moment it was just us. We kissed slowly, savoring the taste of one another, our bodies entwined in a way that felt both exhilarating and familiar. Every brush of her lips sent shivers coursing through me, and I felt her respond in kind, pressing against me with a yearning that matched my own as we lay there, kissing and exploring. It felt as though time had come to a standstill, the world outside the barn completely vanishing, leaving just the two of us immersed in the intensity of what we had finally allowed to unfold. In the warm, dim light of the barn, everything else seemed to fade away, leaving only the undeniable connection between us. Each kiss, every touch drew us closer together. Her hands glided across my skin, exploring every inch, and I followed her lead, my fingers tracing the soft curves of her body beneath me. She looked up at me, her breath coming in quick bursts, lips slightly parted. There was a mix of vulnerability and a deep, unspoken desire in her gaze that mirrored my own. She pulled me closer, our bodies aligning as if we were made for this very moment. We started slowly, relishing the intimacy of every kiss and touch, exploring one another in a way that felt both tender and fervent. The warmth of her skin against mine, combined with the soft sighs escaping her lips, filled the air as we surrendered completely to the moment. Her fingers wove through my hair, drawing me down for another kiss. This one deeper, more urgent. The world outside faded away as we moved together, transforming the barn into our own private sanctuary. Every kiss overflowed with a passion that had long been brewing, now finally unleashed. We became completely lost in one another, the intensity amplifying with every touch and emotion. Her body responded to mine as mine did to hers, and we explored each other in a way that made time seem to vanish. Every moment felt magnified, each kiss drawing us closer until we moved as one, perfectly in sync. The warmth between us intensified as we surrendered to the moment, letting go of everything except the desire that had been building for so long. Her hands gripped my back, and her lips found mine again, weaving together tenderness and urgency. We were both completely immersed in the experience as the evening light filtered through the barn's cracks. We reached the peak of our connection, our bodies intertwined in a way that made everything else fade into oblivion. Each movement brought us nearer, every breath shedding the weight of anticipation until we finally succumbed to that inevitable climax. Our bodies surrendered to the overwhelming wave of pleasure that had been building within us. Afterwards we lay there, tangled in each other's arms, the barn enveloped in a serene quiet, punctuated only by the sound of our breathing. Her head rested on my chest as I gently ran my fingers through her hair, feeling the weight of everything that had just transpired. No words were necessary, our connection spoke volumes. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the barn floor, I realized that our relationship had changed forever. Yet instead of feeling anxious, I was enveloped in a sense of peace, a feeling that this was right. We had crossed a threshold, but we had done it together, and that made all the difference. She lifted her head to meet my gaze, her eyes soft, a content smile gracing her lips. "We'll figure this out," she whispered, her voice quiet yet filled with certainty. I nodded, leaning down to place a gentle kiss on her forehead. "Yeah, we will," I replied softly. With that, we held each other as night enveloped us, knowing that whatever lay ahead, we would face it together. She gazed up at me with those knowing eyes, her lips curling into a tender smile. Unable to resist, I leaned in and kissed her again, this time slower and more gently, allowing the warmth of the moment to wash over us. Her lips parted beneath mine, and I felt the steady rhythm of her heart beating in sync with my own. Her hand slid up my chest, her fingers brushing my skin as she pulled me closer. I kissed her deeply, savoring the softness of her lips, the way her body melted against mine. In that moment, the barn felt like our entire universe. The silence around us was broken only by the gentle sounds of our breathing, harmonizing with the rhythm of our kisses. I let my lips trail from her mouth to her neck, kissing her there and feeling her shiver beneath my touch. Her hands tightened on my shoulders, and her body arched slightly as I kissed the sensitive spot just below her ear, drawing a soft gasp from her. We were entirely wrapped up in one another, the outside world forgotten as my hands roamed over her body, memorizing every curve and line she had to offer. She responded eagerly to every touch, every kiss, her fingers digging gently into my back, encouraging me to continue. Her breath quickened as our lips met once again in a slow, lingering kiss. Her hands moved to my face, cradling my jaw as she kissed me deeply and tenderly, our lips moving together as if we were the only two people in existence. I poured all my emotions and passion into each kiss, responding to her with equal intensity. Every brush of her lips sent sparks through me, and I could feel her responding in kind. We shifted, her body pressing closer to mine as I pulled her into my lap, our lips never breaking contact. The way she kissed me was slow and deliberate, as if she wanted this moment to stretch on forever. It made my heart race. Her fingers tangled in my hair as she kissed me again, her lips soft and warm, her breath mingling with mine as we remained wrapped in each other. She kissed me with a tenderness that made my heart ache, and I returned her affection just as gently, my hands tracing the curve of her back and savoring the feel of her skin beneath my fingertips. The bond we shared felt timeless, as if the moment would last forever, and neither of us wanted it to end. Our kisses gradually slowed, becoming softer and more intimate as we held one another in the dimming light. She rested her forehead against mine, her eyes closed, and I pressed one last kiss to her lips, a promise of everything that had just occurred and all that was still to come. "Whatever happens," I whispered, my lips brushing against hers, "we'll face it together." She smiled against my mouth, her breath warm and steady, her lips finding mine again in one final soft kiss. "Together," she whispered back, her voice filled with conviction. As we sat there still wrapped in each other, kissing softly, the world outside felt distant and unimportant. All that mattered was the bond we shared.